Kia ora. Welcome to Conversations with Wāhine, brought to you by the Wellington branch of the National Council of Women, New Zealand. Good evening, everyone. We have two special guests with us today, Ingrid Leary and Tamati Coffey. Ingrid became the MP for Waiariki in October 2020. She is the chair of the Finance and Expenditure Committee and sits on Economic Development, Science and Innovation, and previously sat on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. She is the co-chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarian New Zealand Group, co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, that would be very interesting right now, and co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Taiwan. Prior to Parliament, Ingrid was an international relations specialist, lawyer, parliamentary press secretary, university lecturer, and broadcaster. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. That made me sound very old, but thank you.
Very accomplished. We'll go with that. All right, I will introduce our second guest, Tamati Coffey, also very accomplished, an award-winning New Zealand TV presenter who took up broadcasting career immediately after finishing an honours degree in political science at Auckland University. He is chair of the Maori Affairs Select Committee, a member of the Environment Select Committee. In 2020, he was re-elected for a second term as a Labour Member of Parliament. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with us. Firstly, I'd like to ask you both, how have the elections been so far?
First of all, thank you, Hayley. Yeah, really, really good. I think that for people that don't like people, they may find this kind of period of campaigning quite hard. For people like Ingrid and myself, we don't mind talking to people. We quite like conversations in the streets, at the Pack and Save, at the the local wherever we happen to be. And for me, actually, I really like campaign period times. It's a good chance to be able to get out there and kind of marry up what we aspire to do in Wellington and some of the things that we do down there to the reality about how some of these policies are implemented on the ground. It's really easy to get caught up in that Wellington bubble, but actually the salt of the earth are out there doing their thing. We love talking to those people. So for me, it's been really good and really warm.
And how's the support from Parliament been in regards to your original resignation and then return upon that?
Yeah, good. It was a good decision to be able to step away from Parliament, as I thought I was going to do. I've had two little babies sitting waiting for me at home when I get home from Wellington at the end of the week. So beautiful for me to have that experience as a new dad. I thought resignation is what I wanted to do, but a couple of months ago things changed when my colleague Kitty Allen went through some pretty tough times and left a gap for a candidate in the East Coast electorate. I know the electorate really well, so I was well placed to be able to step in and step up for our Labour Party, but also for Kitty as well, who wanted the people that she's been supporting for the last 6 years to be represented and supported too. So yeah, it's been good, and all in all, it's been really good for me.
Can I just say too that it's been really sad seeing Kitty go, but the colleagues that we have in our caucus are just so excited that Tamati accepted our prodding and our encouragement, and we are so delighted that he is running in that seat. He is exactly the right person for it, and I can't wait to be working with you again, Tamati.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Oh, that's lovely. I'll just double check. Am I the only one where Tamati's cutting out? Is it my Wi-Fi, or is it happening with the
cutting out a little bit on mine as well?
Okay, yeah. Good to know. I'm not crazy. My Wi-Fi works.
I'll try. My answer is really short when you do ask questions.
For a sec, I wasn't sure if you were making a joke. I was like, has he just paused or is it kind of... Yeah, it was really sad to see, just even the way that the media frames what happened with Kerry. I'd be interested to know, how do you feel about the media framing around this election? Do you feel like it's changed too much compared to previous years?
Maybe I should jump in on that one, Tamati. Just I guess, we're both former journalists. I used to teach journalism up in Fiji as well. And one of the things I've observed is that the pressures on journalists are tenfold now. They're just so big in terms of the need for immediacy, so the deadlines that they need to reach, but also the multiplicity of the jobs they're doing. So before, instead of being able to you could focus on getting the story, now you might need to get the story, do the social media, edit something, maybe even shoot something on your phone. And so that does take a toll, I think, on the ability for journalists to have the time to get context and time to ask why things are happening. And so for me, the practical outcome of that is a journalist is much more likely to frame a story up before they go out, rather than go out truly with an open slate as to what they're going to find. The problem with that is that bias does creep in, and there's nothing wrong with bias if it's declared. The problem we have at the moment is that most of the bias is undeclared, and there can be commercial bias. Some people might say, oh, government-supported media outlets are biased as well. It's tricky getting away from bias, but the best thing we can do is have declared bias, because otherwise people think they're getting a so-called objective view of reality, when in fact there's a lot of framing going on, and it does have an impact on how stories not only reflect society or the election, but actually also shape society and shape elections. One more thing to add to that is journalists need to be paid well, and most journalists, I think, do it because they are called to journalism. It's a vocation, and I'm sure you would appreciate that, both of you. But when we can have higher wages, obviously that does take some of those pressures off, and it also means that we're getting people who are not lured into other professions. We're getting really top-notch people coming into journalism. So I'd like to see the wages of journalists go up as well.
Do you feel like we have enough journalists in the country? I think I've got some questions regarding this before, but just quickly, I'd be interested, because we do have quite a lot less than some other countries at the moment. So along with the fact that we have to share through video or do a whole load of other social media and editing work, we're not having that time to do the research we need to, and we're also having a much bigger workload. Do you think that's correct?
I think when it comes to numbers, for me, it's actually about representation. So it's not, there's not a magic number. It's, are the voices of the community represented in an equal way or an equitable way across the media? Clearly they're not, and a few brave media organisations have admitted that and are starting to work on that. But there is still a bias in the media around those who've had the privilege of education. Minority groups tend not to be as represented, and so the cultural narrative of the country is by definition exclusive. It's not showing everybody. So we really need to work hard to make sure we get people from all walks of life and all communities into this space, just like we do into the legal profession and into the political, to the House of Representatives.
Do you have anything to add on that, Tamati?
I was going to add something just about the diversity of platforms that exist these days. It's not just television. In fact, one of the I regularly take the opportunity to ask people how they digest their media these days, and it's a simple question, but actually very few people that I speak to tune into the news at 6 o'clock, like those of us that live and breathe by news cycles. Some people just get them through Facebook. They get them through Instagram. They sometimes just get them through what their friends tell them, which is, a bit risky, but that's the reality, is that people don't digest the media the same way that they used to. So we have to make sure that, politics especially is broadcast across different platforms, and not just with trained journalists too. You have a bit of citizen journalism, you know.
If you have amazing memory, is there any chance you can go back probably about 2 sentences and repeat that just so we can catch it?
More digital platforms or more platforms, more citizen type journalism, and different people telling stories from.
Again. So back to one of the reasons, or maybe one of the reasons why you had resigned from Parliament, you mentioned before, because you've got 2 young children, and the 2 children were born by surrogacy in 2019 and this year. You introduced a bill to change and streamline the law regarding surrogacy back in May, citing that New Zealand's surrogacy laws do not currently recognise the intended parents of a child as the legal parents, meaning they must adopt the baby. What was your personal experience in the surrogacy process, and where are we now in regards to the progress of this bill?
With my dodgy internet connection, I'll try and answer your question. But look, surrogacy has been amazing and game-changing for our family. We now have 2 little babies at home. That's our everything, and it's changed our perspective and our goals and aspirations for what we want out of life. And I want that for other people that can't have children. And that's not just for rainbow couples. It's for some women, some men that have fertility issues. We need to be able to make, if people want to have families, then actually clear the political hurdles for people to be able to do that. It was humiliating to be only 2 months ago standing in a New Zealand court of law, having to adopt my own flesh and blood, you know, a child that is 50% mine. I had to go through a process where I had to adopt a child, and even worse, the partner of our friend Dane becomes the legal guardian, even though she had nothing to do with the genetics of this baby. Her partner became the legal guardian upon birth. So there are lots of things that are wrong with the surrogacy process. There's streamlining that we can do. It's still a new frontier for many countries around the world, and in New Zealand we're still working out what that means for us. But some countries have done it really well, and they've turned it into a process whereby there is mana and respect for the surrogate mum, who out of the goodness in her heart chooses to help another couple or another family to be able to grow, and we need to help them out. Surrogate mum, if you choose to enter into a surrogacy relationship at the moment, there's very little that you can get to be able to even cover your expenses throughout the time that you're being somebody else's baby. But I'll tell you, the people who do clip the ticket, it's the lawyers, the doctors, the clinicians, the nurses, the counsellors, everybody. But the one person that's doing the heavy lifting in a surrogacy relationship physically is not allowed to get paid. So we don't want to go down the route that America's gone down, which is, you know, a fee for a baby kind of thing. We believe that here in New Zealand, we're not ready for that. I don't know that we'll ever be ready for it, but right now we're definitely not ready for it. But my perspective and the way that I want the law to be able to reform is to at least honour the gift that the surrogate mum is giving, and allow her to have her expenses covered at the very least. And that's part of the thing. We released a report only before Parliament finished for this term, outlining the work that's been done from officials, from the Ministry of Health, from the collection of the submissions. And we're lining it up so that the incoming government, whoever they are, and hopefully it's us, I'll say that, can finish that work, but that we've got something ready to go, shipshape, so that the new government can pick it up and get into it. And I will say this, I've already said to my National Party colleagues that if they happen to be in, and I really hope that they don't, that if they do happen to be in, and they choose to deprioritise the work that we've done on surrogacy, that I'll be leading the charge on Parliament to be able to body of work through, because it's really important, and it doesn't. It's an issue that doesn't have political colours. It affects families that want to grow all time.
Oh.
Cutting out again.
You may have mentioned this while you were cutting out, Tamati, but I think another interesting point is that the fertility rate in the country is actually declining. So we should be doing everything we can to encourage things like surrogacy, because at the moment it's actually declining below the population rate that we actually need. Is there any other kind of amendments that we could make to our surrogacy laws to encourage this, and then potentially some other ways as well, just to encourage population increase as we need?
Yeah, there are some women that want to have IVF. They're told that they're too big. They don't fit the body mass index guidelines, so they have to get that kind of support. And sometimes it's a financial barrier to be able to even. But these are ways, but actually big ways that could be reformed to encourage.
Oh, see there? Oh, I was so keen to hear that. I got little snippets here and there, and I kind of made up a general idea, just a little bit. But did you say that the body mass index for some people who want to go through IVF is sometimes too high, and that's a barrier? I think you mentioned a couple of things as well. But I remember I was looking into it at one point, and I think the wait time alone it can be up to about 5 years. Is that correct? Is it? I think it's for the funded one, up to 5 years.
Yeah. There is a one for sperm donors, the couples that want to go through the ethics committee process. All of that is it does take time. So in effect, they are barriers to being able to grow your family.
Adoptions reached their highest number in Aotearoa in New Zealand in the 1970s, with nearly 4,000 children adopted each year back then. The number of adoptions in New Zealand has reduced drastically over time, with only 125 adoptions granted by the New Zealand Family Court in 2020. Yet there are hundreds of families that are registered with the Ministry of Vulnerable Children who are wanting to adopt, but for some reason or another, the process keeps getting declined or delayed for them. Are the level of children needing new families declining as abortion law reforms and contraceptive is more readily available? Or are there still a lot of children waiting to be matched with a family and just stuck in the system somewhere like in foster care or orphanages? And how can adoption laws be adjusted so mothers who are considering abortion versus adoption see giving their child up to a wanting family as a viable option?
With my dodgy internet connection, I'll try and answer. We've been on a journey with it for a very long time, and actually we've got a pretty rubbish record when it comes to adoption. Children that were given over to be wards of the state were, in some cases abused, and we've had a royal commission into that abuse of some of our children in state care. We also had a time in New Zealand where if you were a little brown child, it was seen that you were best placed with a nice set of Pākehā parents, often connected to the church as well. That's a very real part of our New Zealand history and how we've dealt with adoption. Our current Adoption Act is not fit for purpose. It does need to be reformed. We've started some work on that, but it's a big piece of work and we've not yet finished that. And I know that, I've got colleagues, our good colleague Paul Eagle, who himself was adopted as a child, was given to, as a young Māori boy, a Methodist minister and his wife to be able to grow up, quite disconnected from his culture. And all of those things we're trying to learn from. So the idea that if you're a young Māori child, then maybe you're best placed with a Māori family that can take you on and encourage you to know your culture, know your language, and not be so estranged. One of the most popular TV shows at the moment is Lost and Found, which just goes around trying to connect young adopted children with their families, and there's something really primal about that. We've got a lot of work to do. But I do think that we need to learn from the lessons of the past with adoption.
I'm so glad you didn't cut out for that one. That was quite valuable. Thank you. Just because I know Ingrid doesn't have a lot of time and we do have a time limit anyway, I will move on to slightly more political stuff when it comes to recent events. Treasury's pre-fu was recently released to the public and said inflation would not likely return to within the Reserve Bank's target of 1 to 3% until about December next year. And net debt was close to forecast at 71.4 billion. I think it was as the weaker tax results were largely offset by favorable investment market conditions. I mean, naturally, it's being picked apart by national and the media, but in consideration of our 1 in 100 year economic shock from the global pandemic, and then the onslaught of the country's second largest natural disaster, what are your thoughts on the balance of these books?
Thank you for the question. Really what the pre-fu showed was a really balanced approach, and the fact that there has been excellent economic management. It's interesting, we've been talking about media framing before, and the media framing on this has been, oh, inflation's not going to get down to the 1 to 2% mark till the end of next year. Well, that's actually a really good achievement. We are going to avoid recession. Our economy is performing better than just about every country that we compare ourselves to. We have been in a global inflation pandemic, if you like, which has come about because of COVID, increased petrol prices through the war in Ukraine, and then in New Zealand we've also had the climate events as well. So the time frame to get from the current 6% inflation down to between 1 and 3% by the end of next year is actually a really good result. Our debt levels are still well below the 30% mark. I think they're around they are projected to be around 24% in the forecast period. And we have had this week AAA ratings and independent international organisations talking about the economic management, as well as the ASB calling it world class, I think. So the framing of the pre-fu from some of the media seems to be terribly pessimistic. On our side, we see that this is evidence of really good economic management in really difficult times. Now, I just want to say also that doesn't take away from the fact that it has been really challenging times. There has been a cost of living crisis. And what I'd like people to consider is that the economy is one thing, the cost of living is another thing. It has been caused by those challenges that we've been dealing with globally and also domestically. Spring is here, we're turning a corner. We've still got a really low unemployment rate. We're seeing inflation going to track down. We're seeing business confidence turning the corner. And so the targeted support that we've given people for the cost of living, we hope will make the difference and has made the difference in the difficult times. And now we can look forward to seeing those difficult times ease up as mortgage interest rates go down and all of the flow-on effects that will have in the economy. So the main point's really the economy is a different issue from cost of living. Absolutely get that cost of living's been really tough for everybody, and that's why we've targeted our support, but we've also targeted it to keep inflation down because we're taking a really responsible and balanced economic approach.
I saw an interesting report from CanStar recently. They actually estimated that New Zealanders as a whole are saving more than we did pre-pandemic, despite the cost of living crisis. What would you say to the current tagline in the media about how New Zealand is the only country in the Western world that's still in a recession?
Well, we're not in a recession. We have experienced what was a technical recession. So the normal ingredients for a recession would include high unemployment. And that's what causes the really difficult and negative downward spiral. We've managed to keep unemployment levels really low. In fact, the labour market's been quite tight. So it has been a technical recession. We are not going into full recession. The pre-fu shows that, and that is those reports are prepared by Treasury. Whether people spending or saving is an interesting question, because on the one hand, it could look like saving means that people have got more disposable income and are showing different behaviours, which is positive. Or it could be that they are not spending money because they're not confident about the economy. And so it's difficult to know, what is causing the behaviours, but people can feel confident about the economy. And I think when people do feel confident, you'll see them spending more money. That in turn provides fiscal stimulus, and that in turn does lead to a greater level of GDP, which is just really a measurement of how much energy there is in the economy, how many transactions are happening. But all of that does tend to sort of go towards a more optimistic and self-fulfilling predictions about the economy. Because the really interesting thing, we've been talking about framing. Now, confidence is really important, especially with economics. When we feel confident and talk up economic confidence, we see that translate into economic performance. The same happens when the economy is talked down. And before elections, it's a really political thing to do. It's what every opposition naturally does, is talk down the economy, because that's their ticket, they hope, into getting into power. But it doesn't mean that that is based on fact, and the economy can respond to that or not. And so it's really important that people check the assumptions of what they're hearing and reading and get multiple news sources. The last thing I want to say on this is just about the tax cuts, because we have heard from the National Party, for example, that they want to introduce tax cuts as a way of targeted support, if you like, but instead of targeting those who we would say really needed it, we'd go cut across the board. Now, for us, the problem with those tax cuts is, number one, they don't add up. There's a $2.1 billion hole, and we can't make head or tail of that, and neither can some really credible economic commentators. Secondly, it would involve breaching some international treaties, which would be really bad for New Zealand's reputation, particularly if it involves China and Singapore, which it would. And thirdly, if you give tax cuts across the board, that's got what's called a regressive impact, which means that it's going to be more valuable to those who earn more money. And as you get lower down the pay scale, it's going to be less valuable. And it's simply about ratios. You earn less, and therefore you get less of a tax break. So we think our approach of actually targeting support and keeping inflation low and making sure that our policies are costed is the right way to manage the economy.
Yeah, I'm sure. Oh, sorry, you can go, Harita. I did want to say something quick, but I'll go after you.
On the note about having a small economy in New Zealand, we have the capacity to be affected a lot by worldwide events and economical upsets. And at the moment, China's current economy is a current concern around the whole world. What international issues are you concerned about potentially affecting New Zealand right now and in the near future?
Yeah, it's interesting that people are really focused on these kind of quite hard-edged economic indicators, because there are some other really important things that can happen globally that impact Aotearoa New Zealand. One of them is the geopolitics of the Pacific. So making sure that we have a resilient Pacific that can be independent and not get caught up in the dynamics between some of the superpowers. That's one issue. I worry about what would happen if there's another pandemic. Are we prepared for it globally? And the third thing, of course, is climate change. We really need to be thinking about climate change front and centre of many of our policies. And that's why we are committed to a high-wage, low-carbon future. We need to make sure that we both mitigate climate change and that we can adapt to it if we want to keep a good standard of living in New Zealand. So these pressures, in my view, are probably far bigger and trickier than the ebbs and flows of some of the international currencies, even though they will have an impact as well.
Just going back to what you said before, that was very interesting. I'm still stuck on the idea of media framing, and essentially just how we talk about how this economy is terrible, it's going to affect the rest of us. China's going to affect us terribly, and as you said, we are very focused on China right now. We are also very focused on the cost of living crisis, but back to that CanStar review, it was very interesting because what people were actually saving for actually had nothing to do with the cost of living crisis. A quarter of them was saving to go on a holiday overseas. So I found it incredibly interesting because it really doesn't match what the media portray. And another thing that I've been trying to understand myself was the wealth tax, essentially. And again, you get so much bias over it. I'm no economist. I don't know much. I've been learning about this for probably about 2 months. So it's all very, very new to me. But you did mention that a wealth tax would be good, but it's not really the right time to bring a wealth tax in at the moment. What conditions do you think would be wise to actually bring one in?
I've always been very openly supportive of both a capital gains tax and a wealth tax, but only for the top 1%. And that is because 1% of New Zealand's population own a quarter of the assets. But now is not the right time. Our Prime Minister has made a captain's call, and I absolutely support that. And he is our Prime Minister. There's no reason to think that will change. So it's a bit esoteric, I think, to be talking about a wealth tax at this point. It's not on the agenda at all, and he's made that very clear. What I would say is that, that we have got research and evidence done this year, led by colleagues, that show that the top 1% wealthiest New Zealand families pay a median tax rate of around 8.9%. Whereas most of us pay a median tax rate of around 22% on our incomes. So that doesn't seem fair to me. And I think one of the positive steps we've taken as a government is we have passed the Tax Principles Act, which is all around basically looking at notions of fairness, commonly accepted notions of fairness. There's no hierarchy to them, but being really open and transparent about what are the principles that are at play when we are informing tax policy. So these are principles like vertical equity, horizontal equity, coherence. They sound quite nerdy, and I won't go into the detail, but I think they're just another mechanism by which we can have an open and transparent conversation as a society, rather than having one where nobody really knows how much each other's paying in real tax, because there are so many clever ways to hide income and wealth in the current system.
I would love to hear all the nerdy details. Unfortunately, I know we don't have too much time. I was talking to a Green Party member about it recently. She did give a very long explanation, and I'll have to re-listen to it to fully digest all of it. But we were talking about how other countries have tried to implement a wealth tax, and it hasn't worked out so well. But she did point out that they do have some other kind of wealth tax, essentially like a capital gains tax. Is that something that the government may be considering bringing back in? There's been talks about it for years and years and years, but nothing much has really come of it.
So the Prime Minister has very clearly ruled out that during his leadership there will not be a wealth tax or a capital gains tax. One of the things that we have introduced, which I think does make things a bit fairer, is that we have removed interest deductibility off second homes. And that is really just about people not being able to get an untaxed capital gain and then claim all the expenses against it as well. But in terms of the Greens policy on a wealth tax, I would just say that the type of thing that I would be more supportive of, which is not on the agenda at all, would be something that would only be around that top 1%, because their wealth is so incredibly significantly bigger than the wealth of most New Zealanders. So I think what the Greens have proposed is something quite different, and I won't speak for them.
It'll be interesting to watch. It's been something that's been a huge topic around the world frequently, and I think it will continue to be. So I'm sure it will be coming up in New Zealand politics again at some point.
Yeah,
I'll bring it over to you, Harita.
So I've got a question for both of you now. Going back to your careers in broadcasting and journalism, what has this taught you when navigating communication with politicians and people that maybe don't know so much about the political system as well? And what's your perspective on the public's perceived notion that politicians can really give a straight answer? Tamati, we'll start with you.
for centuries, politicians have not been given straight answers. That's a fact. But I wouldn't say that that's a rule that applies to all. Those of us that have worked in communications, journalism, broadcasting, we know the importance of telling a message. And for me, I mean, I started in kids' TV. So actually, when I give messages out, I often try and whittle it down to something that I could explain to a 7-year-old and they would potentially get it. And in politics, we often deal with the big, meaty issues of the world, which are great for us to talk about in our little whiskey drinking circles. But actually, to communicate that back to audiences that are sitting in front of their TV, eating their cheese toasted sandwich, and just rubbing the sleep out of their eyes in the morning, it's a different kind of audience, and you have to. I believe it's beholden on us as politicians to be able to simplify the messaging around it. I mean, Ingrid just before started talking about regressive taxes, and I started moving into quite a nerdy space. So, I just think of people at home that maybe glazing over at that point, but she herself pulled herself up on it and said that's actually it sounds pretty nerdy. And I think it's that kind of real talk that you are able to do when you've had a history in broadcasting or communications, that you can acknowledge when you're starting to sound a little bit highbrow, a little bit nerdy, and actually turn your conversation so that people can understand what it is that you're talking about. Because in the candidate debates that I've been to so far, I think that's one of my successes, is actually being able to talk about climate change in a way that normal people understand it and how it impacts them. I'm able to talk about what we've done as a government so that it helps people to understand what we have done and our policies that we're putting out there. All of that broadcasting comms experience helps you to be a really good communicator. And I think that politicians that have that experience are better off for it. I think the audiences that they talk to are better off for it. And I feel a bit sorry for some of those people that don't have that experience and speak very highbrow in front of a group of elderly residents at the local rest home, and they have no idea what they're talking about. So yeah, I see it as a badge of honor, actually.
Tamati, I'll take a leaf out of your book when I go off to my candidates meeting tonight, because I'm constantly having to remind myself not to get too much into the details. There's so much to say about everything, and it all comes out in a rush sometimes. And you're absolutely right. It is about boiling it down, but also knowing who your audience is, I think, is really important, because there are some audiences where much more technical kind of discussion is valid and relevant. And actually, I've been at meetings with sector groups where people have dumbed it down too much, and it has been a little bit insulting or a little bit patronizing to those particular audiences. But sometimes that also means that the candidates themselves aren't really across the topics. So for me, I think I'm not sure if it's about politicians not giving straight answers, because words are quite blunt. And I think what law has taught me in particular, mixed with the journalism, is that we're really lucky actually with the English language. We've got very specific words that we can use to capture meaning. And so what politics is teaching me is the need to be very careful with our words. And when you think about it, what politicians are doing most of the time is listening and talking. I think we probably undervalue the absolute importance of listening, because when we can listen to the room and feel into the audience, then we're going to be much more powerful with our messages. But we really are making a lot of decisions and contributing to conversations. It's all about talking. And so that need to choose our words carefully and to understand the impact of our words is, I think, what drives that idea that people don't want to be beholden, because we need to be our word. My final point on that is just that I think both Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins are really good examples of people who don't come across as anything except authentic. They speak authentically, they mean what they say, they keep their word, and they're very clear and transparent. And I think that's the most that we can ask from politicians, is that they are authentically themselves.
Yeah, it's a little hard for the public to see that when the media often cut them off with, I guess you could say, the soundbite culture that you have referenced before, or the gotcha culture that we hear about quite a lot now. I've been watching so many interviews where the politician gets cut off, like they get cut off before they even really get to make a point, which kind of shuts them down and makes it hard for anyone to really understand what's happening. There's also a general impression in the public that politicians feel the need to show strength and confidence in the public eye, even when they maybe don't have the answers. I mean, you'd hope they do, but we're all human. We don't always know, right? Is there a necessary method to the madness, or could more constructive communication and trust be developed with more humility on both sides between media, public, and politician? How do we go about that?
I think Jacinda Ardern is a really good example of somebody who was able to be authentic and be vulnerable, but not in a way where the media then use that vulnerability for gotcha, which is the term that I use, So I think the public likes to see the humanity, the vulnerability, and the humility of politicians, particularly if they don't have the answers. And I thought Jacinda was able to do that incredibly well, and somehow was able to also have strength. As a female politician, one of the vulnerabilities is that there can be a bit of a pack mentality, I think, sometimes from some of the journalists. And so there is a sense, correctly or incorrectly, that if we show any kind of vulnerability, that we might then be open to attack. Now, that might just be a perception. It might be just an anxiety. I do think it drives some colleagues. And what I am really grateful for with Jacinda was her ability to show that leadership can have a different style. And that has given a lot of confidence to a lot of women colleagues, I think, from across the House.
So now we've got a question for both of you again. How have your thoughts on politics and the behaviour between opposing politicians changed throughout your various careers?
Hopefully the internet connection is all good. Just as a disclaimer, I'm currently in Ohiwa, which is not far from Opotiki, about 15 minutes up the road, but I'm in a little cul-de-sac staying at one of our Labour members' houses. It's a beautiful view, but very little internet connection. So there you go.
It's a good trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. Your question about behaviour and opposing politicians. I'll just start this by saying this is the only job I think in the world where you have a group of people that are well paid to tell you at the end of every day that you're doing a rubbish job, and we call them the opposition. And you've got a whole gallery of reporters and media that are also there to try and find a little bit of dirt on you, find something that you've said to trip you up on, to create a gotcha moment. And that can be a really tough environment to work in. But I've got to say, whether or not you're on our side of the House or the other side of the House, we're all fair game, and we all go through the same kind of scrutiny that is beholden on politicians that inevitably are there to spend taxpayers' money and try and make some big, bold decisions that doesn't always please everybody. What we have sometimes in Parliament is the opportunity to do little political exchanges across party, and that creates really nice opportunities to essentially hang out with other politicians from other parties, and they can actually be really game-changing moments where people that you normally wouldn't call, hang out with, talk to, you're suddenly in Africa, sitting across the table from another politician that holds completely different views, and you try and find a bit of commonality. And those are moments where you can actually start to understand other people and the lives that they lead and the decisions that they make, and you can actually come back really good friends. So I encourage that kind of those kinds of experiences to try and get a bit more common ground going with opposing politicians than then those things that inevitably we rub up against. Ingrid may have a different perspective.
No, I was just going to add, I think also the select committee process is a form of that as well, where we sit in these select committees, which are made up of members of different political parties, and we work through legislation, through the drafting of it, and we debate and discuss, and often we find common ground, or individual MPs might with members from other parties, and work together to try and strengthen the legislation. And it's really healthy, I think, because not only do you get better legislation, but it's really important as a politician not to be constantly in your own echo chamber. You need to be able to test your ideas and test your views. I think where we differ from other political parties is we have a different values base. So that's what keeps you in your own team. But testing ideas constantly is a very rigorous and necessary part of the democratic process.
That's a really, really great answer. There's so much more I would really like to talk about as far as that goes, and just constructive communication in general, because I think the way that we behave in Parliament can be used in many different aspects of life, and vice versa. It's really intriguing. Psychology is incredible, and a huge part of that happens in Parliament naturally. We watch it. I watch it on Parliament TV every time it's on. It's great. But anyway, there's so many more things, so many more questions I wanted to ask, but we do only have a few minutes left. So I think maybe to wrap it up, what I would like to ask is, first you, Tamati, if you're elected as Labour's MP for East Coast, what are the main concerns you would like to address in this area? Naturally, there's been a huge cyclone. I'm sure that's one of your top priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've still got a roading network, which is still patched like a patchwork quilt. And we're getting over Bailey bridges, which are only supposed to be temporary. The Waiariki Gorge, which connects Opotiki to Gisborne, which is a lifeline arterial route for this region, is closed between 7 p.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning. So if you happen to roll up to the barrier at 7:05, you are out of luck, and you have to turn around and go and find some accommodation. So, we often talk about the mighty East Coast. At the moment, it's not feeling very mighty because it's still recovering from a pretty big weather event, which we haven't seen the likes of since Cyclone Bowler back in the 80s. But there are, there's some optimism out there too. The cyclone recovery will come and it will go. But as I talk to people, there are huge opportunities in the digital and the tech space for people that live out here in the East Coast. They come here for the lifestyle. They love to be here and to stay here. So they want to be able to have a digital footprint and passport to be able to rock up to any cafe on the East Coast and run their business from here. So huge opportunities there. Huge opportunities in the aquaculture space. Te Whānau Apanui and Te Whakatohia are about to settle their historical treaty settlement with the government. That's going to create opportunities for aquaculture and open ocean farming. They want to be sustainable with what that looks like. So huge opportunities for the economy to grow out of that. Ag tech is huge, and it's my connection with farmers that actually I'm a geek for tech, and I love seeing they've got to be able to do the work that they do. They're on board with being a lot more, sustainable and environmentally friendly. And so we talk about that regularly and where the opportunities are to fix some of the wicked problems they face. Forestry, we employs a lot of people up here, despite the slash that rolls up on the beaches up and down the East Coast. But people still understand that forestry is always going to be part of the economic fabric here on the East Coast. We just need our companies that are doing the forestry to be a lot more sustainable about their practices, and also looking for opportunities to do a bit more processing here as well. So it's easy to get caught up in the devastation from the cyclone and the repair work that needs to be done. but there's a whole lot of opportunities up here, and that's the stuff that inspires me, especially for the younger generation coming through, to know that they can stay in the East Coast. They can choose to live in Opotiki, where I am, or they can choose to live in Gisborne and actually be their best selves as well, without feeling the need to move to Auckland, move to Wellington, or even, to Australia or further afield. That's my goal, and that's what I'm pledging to offer to people on the East Coast if I'm elected as their MP.
That's great.
That's a big 3 years ahead of you if you get elected back in. And Ingrid, if you're elected as MP for Taieri, what would you like to address in your electorate?
There's three big areas that I want to continue to focus on. One of them is for South Dunedin to become the poster child of how to adapt to a climate challenged future. So South Dunedin had really bad floods in 2015. Since then, there's been a lot of world-leading research led by the council about what can be done to adapt and to keep the population in the safe places there, rather than having to get everybody to retreat or move out. I would like to see a scale of ambition for that, which means it's not just funded by ratepayers, but there's actually government investment. And so that's a kaupapa I've been working on and making some progress on too. Homelessness is a really big issue for our people here, and that's both in terms of state houses, but also just transitional housing as well. I've seen the incredible city mission building in Auckland, which is really a massive game changer for people who have been sleeping rough in Auckland. I would love us to have some kind of facility like that here in the south, especially because we have such cold nights. And I'd also like to see a rural lens on how we look holistically at our rural communities. So rather than just saying, oh, we need to get nurses to stay in the community, or we need to fix some classrooms or whatever, I want to have an approach where our rural communities feel that they have everything they need there with them. So they have teachers that live there, they have accommodation, they have medical facilities, they have banking facilities. That would be so great. And there are so many rural communities around New Zealand that face that issue. So we need to sort of tackle that head on. But my biggest legacy, I hope, by the time that I leave this job, is to have done something to make our tax system fairer. I think that's the magic bullet in terms of really being able to close the inequality gap. The tax principles bill is a really great first step, and I'm really proud of that piece of work from our government.
Oh, exciting. Just quickly before we go, politics is a serious place for good reason, but it's always important we don't take ourselves too seriously. So very, very quickly to both of you, what's the funniest thing that has happened in your parliamentary journey so far? We'll go Tamati first.
If you're still thinking, Tamati, I can do mine, which is
we can do that.
Watching the National Party members in the Finance and Expenditure Committee continue to struggle for months and months, distinguishing Anna Lork, Helen White and myself from each other, because we're all three Pākehā blonde women.
That's a little ironic. I had someone telling me the other day that they have very few Māori or Samoan members, so it's quite interesting that they were struggling to distinguish you. All right, Tamati.
I'm finding it hard to think of one thing, because funny stuff actually happens on the regular, on a daily basis. The political environment is an environment. I remember Jacinda gave me my grandest bit of advice when I first got into Parliament, which was you should constantly feel comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because you walk lots of different environments and you never know what's going to happen, and you might think it's going to be a serious debate that you go into, and it ends up being one of the funniest things that you've been to. I'll list one thing, which is that I went to a fun quiz night in the electorate of Rongotai, which our colleague Paul Eagle has been the MP for the last 6 years, and it was a funny, light-hearted debate. And our sister, our Tongan MP, Anahela Kanongata'a, she was there on our debating team. I can't even remember what we were arguing about, but she got up and she was terrible and usually a really great debater. But on this night, she was having a terrible night. And Paul and I were just looking at each other the whole time going, tell her to sit down. Tell her, can she please sit down? Can the Labour person on the debating team please sit down? E noho, e noho. And actually it became the kind of laughing joke amongst the crowd. I think at some point she talked about Tongans eating dogs and eating people that disagreed with them. A little bit crazy. And anyway, there was a lot of laughter, obviously a little bit of beer and wine flowing around too. But that's a moment where I think I left the evening with the stitch, you know, that you get when you laugh too much. That was a big one for us.
Well, they're both good ones. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat with us. It was fantastic. I would always love to have you back after elections to have some more pointed discussions on one particular topic so we can actually get in depth and I can understand and our listeners can understand a bit better too. But for now, good luck with the elections. And this has been Hayley and Harita with Ingrid Leary and Tamati Coffey on Conversations with Wāhine.
Thank you for your great questions.
Oh,
Bye.
thank you.